So I should have been dead in 2010, and probably some other times before that. There's been times that there's been some close calls, but in 2010, it's interesting because it was one of the worst times of my life. And I've spoke of personality collapses. I had one then too, a major one, but it didn't bring me to awareness of it, like this relationship breakup did 5 years ago. It didn't. It's interesting how life works like that. So it's not always near death things that will bring a person to self awareness of their issues or their mental illness or personality collapses. It's not always like that. I mean, how many people do you know have had drug overdoses, but they go right back to the drug, or they go right back to a destructive lifestyle, and they do it over and over again until they're no longer here? Now, for me, there was some things I took away from that near-death experience, and I'll explain it to you. In the video I did on personality collapses, I went through some of the shifts that I have been through, where I've went from one spectrum to the other and trying to adapt to what other people might like, or try to fit in with a certain group, or try to fit in with a certain girl I want to date, or certain friend group I want to have, or whatever. But going back to 2010, I was on a kick with working out all of the time. So my thing back then was, I'm going to be a bodybuilder. And I did. I became a bodybuilder for a while, and I'm going to just be muscular, and I'm going to be ripped or whatever. I might even try to get pretty big, and that will get me the attention I want. And it was a bad time when I look back at it. I really try not to dwell on it much, because I look back at it now and I'm like, man, I was so far out there, lost in a lot of ways, as far as just, I've often thought I'm a borderline, have borderline personality disorder, possibly. And I have been diagnosed with bipolar before, but I say borderline because there's narcissism in BPD, and I had so much of it at that time that there's a lot of times I had no feeling about much of anything, and I was just so caught up in the superficial and not in touch with reality a lot of the time, really. And all I wanted to do is have the superficial looks. It was really bad at that time, because I'm like, this is what's going to get me intimacy. This is what's going to get me dates. This is what's going to keep me cool with people, whatever. And I went to the extreme with it. And you're saying maybe, well, working out, that caused you a major problem. But you think about when you have personality issues, and you have mental illness, and you have these different things going on like bipolar, and you might have a personality disorder, and you've always adapted yourself to fit in with different people, not knowing who you really are, not trying to be who you really are, not trying to be authentic in any way, really. It just causes major problems, and you'll go to extremes sometimes. And that's what I did back then. Back then, I really thought I was indestructible. So, around that time, that I was 34. I was 34, and what had happened was I had been working at this comedy theater. And in the other video about personality collapses, I talk about this girl in Alabama I dated, and I became country. It's one of the times I shifted dramatically and acted like I was, going to be just countrified, redneck, whatever, like something I thought she was going to go for, and what she would like, her family would like, her kids would like, whatever. Well, that relationship ended up breaking up. It wasn't pretty either. I mean, it was messed up. I'll just say that. I don't know if I'm gonna go into much detail there, but it was a messed up deal how that all happened and unfolded. But what happened was I did go through some depression after that ended, and ended up on Lexapro for a brief time to try to get me through that. But it didn't go on, like, we're talking about maybe 6 months of a depression, off and on. At one point got pretty bad. And then what happened was I was working at this comedy theater, and I started to kind of become friendly with the other ticket booth people. And at that time when I started working there, well, I started working there when I had that relationship, but let's go to the point where I'm starting to want to get into this bodybuilding and stuff. So by that point, I'm already friends with these people in the ticket booth. We party a lot. We go to the nightclubs. We all are drinkers. I get in with them, and we have house parties. We have parties at my place too, where everybody comes over. We get just crazy drunk. Sometimes I'm blacking out. This happened throughout my life too, where there were times in my life I'd have blackouts from drinking too much. That's some of the times I could have died, because, sometimes I was left unattended when this would happen, and, I might not have woke up, but luckily I always woke up. But we would party crazy. There was drinking and driving. There was all kinds of stuff we would all do. And fortunately, nobody ever got into any real trouble or hurt anyone else, or we were just very fortunate. But I was in that in crowd. I was happy with that at the time, because I was like, oh man, I'm in with the cool kids. I'm fitting in. It's all great. It's amazing. That's what I wanted, especially after that breakup and the depression I went through at the time. And we were just partying, living it up. And then what happened was I decided I was leaving that place, and my dad got me into some sales work where I was traveling on the road, going to do, I was selling things on the road, commission sales, traveling. And I got into this bodybuilding too, and I got addicted to that. But what happened was I got addicted so much, I didn't get on steroids, but I was close to wanting to do that. I was taking stuff you get over the counter, but very powerful stimulants, creatine, and the creatine itself wasn't bad, but then I went from the creatine getting into the high-powered stimulants and pills and powders and all of this stuff. And then I have an addictive personality, or the addiction goes with all my different personalities. I have this addiction issue as well I've had over the years. And I got to where I just needed more and more of that stuff. And then next thing you know, I'm drinking it like coffee, the powders and stuff, because it also makes you feel really up, high. Just, you don't want to lose that feeling. When you come off that feeling, everything would feel just so dull. And with the mental illness issues I dealt with, it's something I craved. I wanted to keep that high all the time. So, I'm working out constantly. I'm 5'6", I got up to 190 pounds of muscle. If you was to compare me to somebody, if you always think of like Rey Mysterio, the wrestler, we're the same height. I was like his size at one point. And though my cardio wasn't very good, but I actually did achieve what I had set out to do, and got big and muscular. And I did date more to some extent, whatever, but everything was just kind of superficial and not a lot of meaning and a lot of chaos, a lot of drinking, a lot of chaos. I mean, like I went out with a couple of topless dancers, and I'm not saying all topless dancers are drugging and drinking. I mean, that's a cliche, but these two did drink a lot, and it was just chaos with that, chaos with the friends I still partied with. And looking back on it, I really think it's sad. It was a lot of I was covering up all of my issues with the drinking, with the bodybuilding, with the superficial shit, and it was just craziness, to where eventually what happened after a long period of time traveling on the road doing sales and then living this grind of working out constantly and having some fun. I'm not going to say I didn't have some fun along the way. There was some fun times, but ended up, I met this guy. Well, he's a guy I used to work with at that comedy theater. He played guitar, and we got together, and next thing you know, he was out of work, and then I had a spell where I was out of work from the sales job, and we were drinking whiskey every night. He was coming over, we were drinking Canadian Mist, and ended up liking it because it was real smooth, and we would just take shots of that stuff, and then we'd play guitar. And the thing was, we were actually pretty good. We learned a whole bunch of songs. He could sing. He played guitar better than me, so he taught me all these songs, and I got better, but we were drinking all the time. And then I just wasn't working, and he had not been working. And the thing is, looking back at it, I feel like he had a lot of narcissism, and he was really, I let him be a bad influence on me because I have personality issues anyway, so I can gravitate to one thing to the other, and I was empty inside. So being empty inside like that, I got addicted now to the drinking more and still taking my stimulants. And what happened, I stopped working out as much, and I lost a lot of my muscle mass, but then I was obsessed with being thin. And this is another theme of mine, having at times in my life eating disorder as well, just not taking into account. In the past, I'm pretty good now, but in the past, there were times not taking into account proper nutrition, not having common sense. I think this can be a theme with people with personality problems. A lot of the time, I think it can be an issue with narcissism as well, where sometimes you just don't think right. You just think of the superficial, you just think of what you want. If you get really caught up in that really bad, you don't take care of yourself. You'd be very self-destructive, especially if you've never had something really horrible happen to you to the point of knowing you're going to die. And this is what ended up eventually happening, is to where I kept this drinking up, kept taking these stimulants, but then I wasn't working out. I was combining this stuff. I was still sometimes having blackouts. And then I wasn't eating because I wanted to stay thin. I knew I wasn't working out, and I didn't want to be what I considered overweight. So I was like, okay, I'm just not going to eat hardly anything, and I'll be fine. Drinking, taking these pills, taking these powders. And what happens, I started having these fainting spells, and I started feeling bad. And because my common sense just wasn't working at all, I couldn't think straight. I couldn't think in reality. It's really scary. Only people I think that go through this really understand how scary it can be if they become aware of it. That's the thing. If you even ever become aware of it, and I can look back now and say, oh my God, who was that person? I can look at parts of my life and be like, who is this? Especially now that I feel like I'm living as close to authenticity as I can or ever have. But I look back at that, and I wasn't eating, and I thought I'd be fine, but yet I was having these fainting spells. And I thought, this is what my mind thought, okay, this is how crazy this will sound. I thought I needed a lot of water. I thought water would solve everything. Not understanding what I know now about nutrition is that really what would have probably solved my issue was salt and potassium. But I also was taught salt was bad for you, and salt would cause high blood pressure. I could get obsessed about stuff like that. But the truth is, you need so much salt in your body, and if you work out a lot, you need quite a bit of salt. You need potassium, you deplete it. And if you're drinking and stuff like that and doing things to yourself in a destructive manner, you're going to lose salt, and you're going to lose that stuff. If you go to the bathroom, you're going to lose all that stuff. And I was not eating hardly anything, so I lose all my salt, lose the potassium, and then here I am drinking all this water thinking, oh, that's the problem. What was happening was I was just flushing what little bit I had in me out, and it's like water toxicity. So it wasn't even the pills and all that stuff that was going to be my actual downfall as much as it was the malnutrition of my own body, not understanding what I'm doing to myself. And what happened was, of course, the guy I'm playing guitar with and all of this is nowhere to be found when I start to get really sick. And one night I'm at home and, well, let's step back a few steps. I was actually out on the road when I started to get real bad. I was out traveling, and it was actually my dad is the one that got me into sales work, and I actually went on a trip with him, and he witnessed these spells I was having. And one night I had him come to my hotel room and just dump out I thought, okay, what is it? Is it the powders? Is it the pills? I had him dump out a lot of my shit. He didn't even know I took half of that stuff. He dumped a lot of it out, flushed it down the toilet, but of course I was still having the spells from not eating right. We get back home, me and him aren't really getting along that well, and that's a whole nother story. We were having a lot of issues. And I'm at home alone, and these spells started to get really bad, and I started throwing up all over the place. I just started throwing up all over my little trailer I was living in at the time, and I lived up in the woods, and I barely got a phone signal up there sometimes. So it was scary, and what happened was I didn't want to go to the hospital, but it got so bad I just finally knew I'm going to die right here. I'm going to pass out and won't be found for a while. So what happened was, as I got almost to the brink of that happening, I managed to call an ambulance, and luckily barely had a signal that night by my door. And what I can remember, this is what I can remember because I was so bad, I was losing it. And I remember calling them, slurring, my voice was starting to slur. And I remember them coming barely. I can remember pieces of it, and I was still standing, but by the time they got me into the ambulance, I had blacked out, and my heart never stopped beating, but I went into seizures, and they got me to the hospital, and I had seizures there, and they had put IVs in me. They probably already knew kind of what was going on a bit, but they were putting fluids in me with salt, potassium, that kind of stuff. And I went into a coma. I went into a day-long coma. And my parents didn't know where I was at. And at this time, they lived, they didn't live too far from me at this time, actually. But they didn't know where I was at. And they hadn't heard from me, and they were trying to call me, and then they had known, of course, I had been sick, that I had not been right. They go to my place looking for me, and they just are scared. You know, when we talked about it later, they were just like, we went in the woods looking for you, and after we got into your place, I got my landlord to let them into my place, They thought they were going to find me dead in there. Don't blame them. They go out in the woods looking for me. They're like, he's not around. So then they start calling a couple of the hospitals, and they found out that I was admitted. And I was lucky to survive this. A lot of people, they do pass away from water toxicity or malnutrition, food or eating disorder type things. And my brain had swelled, and that's when my voice had started slurring, and then I went into a coma. But luckily they had gotten to me, got the IVs in me, even though I was out for a day. When I woke up, I did still slur for a while, and I couldn't talk straight or think straight, but I recovered. I was lucky to make a full recovery from that. Now, it changed me for a while, but it never made me, as I was saying earlier, fully aware. It never made me aware like now, like what this relationship I had 5 years ago did to me. That's why I say, well, life really works in a strange way, that it was really a person that brought me to the point I'm at now, and not that experience in 2010. But what happened after that in 2010 is that it did get me off those drugs. I never went back to them. Never again did I had become totally frightened. I was addicted to energy drinks too, on top of all that stuff. So I never went back to any of that stuff. I just drank coffee. I do love coffee. That's what I have right here. I have black coffee. And I love a dark roast. I like very strong coffee. I do probably drink coffee that would knock some people over. But we all have some vice, we all have something. Coffee is my thing. And I like it black. I like good coffees. After going to Sweden in 2019, I actually still drink Swedish coffee, not all the time, but I actually really, really think it's some of the best coffee I've ever had. But anyway, besides the point, going back to that near-death deal in 2010, it got me off the drugs, it got me off the energy drinks, which I never did go back to. I will say that changed for me. But I probably had a lot of complex trauma after that. And among so many other things I've been through in my life, that was one of the other things that compounded on top of me back then. I had a lot of anxiety. I thought for a long time I wasn't right. For a good almost 2 years, the trauma was pretty bad from that. I thought I was going to die from different things. I thought I had permanently damaged myself, even though I had recovered. I just kept thinking I had done some physical damage, which I hadn't actually permanently done. But when you go through something like that, a lot of times your mind is just it's just not right. And I shrunk back into myself. I went from having that huge ego I had to, it's one of the times I fell back into Christianity for a bit. Not for a long time, but I was so scared and had this complex trauma. I fell back on what I had grown up with. Now, as I've stated before, I don't believe in organized religion or any of that type of stuff now, but back then that was kind of a crutch for me because I was having so much anxiety. And I thought there was some kind of deity punishing me, which I just don't believe that's the way things work now. But I went back into that. I shrunk into myself, and I wasn't able to socialize for a while. I ended up getting a job as a waiter, and I just wasn't myself for a while. And I wasn't myself again until I got like this kind of presenter acting type gig at a museum. It was actually Titanic Museum attraction, which still exists in Pigeon Forge near the tourist town near where I live. And that's what broke me back out of out of some of that trauma. Was I really studied acting and character acting for a while, and public speaking. I got into public speaking because in that job you had to do a lot of public speaking in front of groups and crowds, and you had to know a lot of stories and a lot of things about the Titanic, and be able you address as an officer and things of that nature, which really expanded me socially. Actually, it was a good thing for me at that time once I got into that. So the point of all of this is you just never know what's going to bring you to an authentic place. You could easily think it's going to be the most, you could have a cliche thought in your mind that the most, it's going to be you almost dying from something traumatic that would do it, but it's not always that, because as I have stated before, for me, it wasn't that event. It did get me off those drugs and things like that, but I still was not authentic. I did go into some new stuff, but I still never really understood anything about, I just kind of gravitated, even though I learned acting and learned public speaking, I still had issues with my personality. I still would try to adapt and fall into groups there. And in my life, I still did not become aware of myself or my real issues. I didn't go to therapy even after that event. So it was a relationship for me. That's what I'm saying. It was such a different thing that you would never think of. It was a person. And as some people would say, a twin flame, which I don't no longer believe, but I do believe it was a soul-to-soul thing that affected me specifically. It affected me on such a profound level that it forced me to do all the introspection, and you can watch my previous videos and I do talk more about that. So with that, I don't really have, as usual, I don't really have a place to end this video, but I will talk to you guys later.